if I have a town and a bunch of people start moving to my town and they're bringing their cultural stuff, I don't have any fear that they're going to kill off my culture, because anything that's worth value to me, I'm going to protect anyway. And I advocate for the freedom for them to engage in and support and value their culture, right up to the extent that it impedes on the secular, reasonable, scientific founded, laws and things.
It's like a boundary beating.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to beat these boundaries quite hard, allow a lot to go on within it. But yes, and once certain lines are crossed, you've got to take a stronger view on it. That, by the way, I mean, I hark on about it. It may not be of much interest, but this is why France obsesses me, because within 1 year, they had the massacre at Charlie Hebdo, most satirical, secular, atheist paper. They had the massacre of most of the staff of that magazine, and also a priest beheaded at the altar in Rouen as he was saying Mass. If that extremity of things can happen in a culture in quite a short space of time, that is the sort of thing that would return you to the fundamental questions. And as I say, one of the fundamental questions all the time is what we have the sort of natural default position of humankind, or is it a pretty unusual thing caused by quite unusual factors? And I, at any rate, take the second view, and therefore think that from the secular tradition and others, you've got to be aware of it, at the very least, to make sure you don't piss it away.
I think one of the things that this is another difference from two sides of the pond, and we talked about this very briefly, is that people will contact me on the show and say, "Oh, you spend all your time talking about Christianity. That's all you talk about, Christianity. Why would you do that?" Because it's a call-in show, and that's what people are calling in about. First of all, it's also my background. Well, you don't talk to us about Islam at all. And I was like, well, actually, we have many, many times, and there are occasionally Muslim callers. There's one of them who I'm fairly sure I made cry, even though that wasn't my intent. But we address those things, and yet the thing that I keep trying to point out to people is that while I might agree that when it comes to religions worldwide, Islam might be the single most dangerous ideas and be the greatest risk worldwide, but that doesn't mean it's the greatest risk in the United States or in Texas or in Austin. Sure. And you've spoken a great deal about Islam, and I think that there are different things going on in the UK that we don't see here. I mean, Muslims in the United States, I mean, apart from the general fear that has been instilled in everybody, which I think is at least exaggerated for us, but I couldn't say that for everybody. There are Muslims in Dearborn that are, drinking and getting tattoos, and they've been their version of Islam has been poisoned, probably for the good, by the secular and perhaps even Christian culture that they're surrounded with. I once
was with a pretty devout Muslim friend, and he'd been fasting for Ramadan, and he broke the fast with me in a pub with a pint of beer, which I thought was a happy meshing of cultures.
And so we see these changes, and granted, I don't know, and you're free to tell us what we don't know about how things are much more in conflict with regard to people trying to impose their version of Sharia law in conflict with UK laws. And
there is some of that, and some of it's exaggerated, but a lot of it is real and is there. And I mean, I give the example of the de facto blasphemy law that now exists across Europe. I mean, it's not just Charlie Hebdo. Quite a number of colleagues and friends have been shot at in recent years for blaspheming Islam, and that's in 21st century Europe, and it's something which I, at any rate, and a number of other people refuse to shut up about, because we think it's intolerable that should be the situation. And the oddity of that is that, if there were to be anyone who decided to kill Michael Palin tomorrow because of the life of Brian, strongly urge this is not something I think should happen.
Yes.
But if that were to happen, the whole culture, everything would turn on whoever did that. There would be no ifing and butting. There'd be no kind of, well, you've got to understand the offense he caused. We'd just be saying no. And that isn't the case with this other religion in this situation, partly because people are worried about allegations of bigotry, partly because they're worried that, it's kind of punching down, and one of the motifs of the time on this, and that you might be upsetting a beleaguered minority and so on. But a third of UK Muslims polled after the Charlie Hebdo attacks said that they had some sympathy with the attackers. A third. I happen to be gay, and I'm not delighted by some of the attitudes you can still hear from churches here about homosexuality, but in my own country, there was a poll in 2009 that found among British Muslims 0% thought that you should be tolerant towards homosexuality. And a poll taken 2 years ago found that the majority of British Muslims wanted being gay to be made illegal now. So that's the sort of thing where you just start to worry. Okay, we've seen this off from one direction. What if it comes in another? And what if it benefits and gains from the fact that people are basically not primed to deal with it anymore?
There's a documentary on Netflix, because I watch tons of documentaries on Netflix, especially when I'm on the road, and it's called Welcome to Leith, and it is about a bunch of Nazis or neo-Nazis who moved to a town somewhere in, Wyoming, Montana, someplace, and essentially tried to take it over.
Right.
And it's really eye-opening because it makes you wonder, well, what would happen if they tried to do this in my town? Now, it would take a lot of them to take over, Austin or New York or whatever, but in a small town, if you had a massive group of people show up with a particularly dangerous ideology, such that they could actually take over the city council, that they would become the dominant voting bloc.
Right.
What protections do you have?
Right.
In this case, I'm interested in we're looking at exploring this as a project. There are a number of towns that have been taken over by religious ideologies. There are towns that are almost exclusively Mormon or Hasidic Jew, and I have concerns about the constitutional rights of the individuals who live in those towns.
Sure.
Because in the States, the default is, oh, well, that, you really can't have any power. Because we've got the Constitution and it's there to protect us. And as a reminder, you can in fact run for office anywhere in the United States if you're an atheist. Please stop spreading around that thing of my state constitution says you must believe. Yes, that was all settled by the Supreme Court in the 50s and then fought a couple other times as well. But you can run for office. But we had to fight it in court just to show what the Constitution says. And if they could take over a town, I get why people are terrified of that. Wouldn't it be a more practical solution? I don't know how this applies in the UK, but to just make sure that our laws are such that people can exercise their religious freedom, but they can't, there's the old joke about the Constitution, two wolves and a sheep are arguing over what's for dinner. And the Constitution, or the democracy, is what allows them all to vote, and the Constitution is what guarantees that the sheep's not going to be dinner. And it seems that we can enforce those ideas so that people can have their preferred culture, provided it can coexist with the surroundings.
The moment that's what we're really struggling with across Europe at the moment, is to work out where the moments are where you tread over the rights of others in a way that's unacceptable, and also then what you do about it. Because this is, it's a dialogue of the demented at the moment, where the society says, there are some things we really strongly believe in, and if you don't believe in them, well, please do. It's not very assertively made. There's a sort of, well, what happens if I don't? Well, please do. There's no follow-up.
It starts to look like war and conflict and physical violence ends up being inevitable if you can't come to a reasonable
Yes, and some people do fear that's the case. I don't take as apocalyptic a view as that, but there's a long way for this to run, and it doesn't all go in a good direction.